Well, hello everyone. Look, you're going to be sick of seeing my face so often, as you know. As you know, Bob is down for the count. He's had a fairly nasty eye infections. He's out for the count. So you've got me again tonight, but we have a wonderful replacement. Whether he's the full replacement, I think Bob is worried. We will find out over the next 45 minutes. Alfred Ngaro, welcome to the show.
Kia ora, shalom, and it's great to be here. Talking about Bob, just before I came on, and I'm not a snitch, but Bob sent me a text, and it read, "The campaign for Bring Back Bob has just gone up," and he said he now has 3 people. I replied by saying, well, because he only can see out of one eye, he missed the decimal point. It's actually 0.3% of one person.
I think he's getting worried. He was trying earlier in the week the hashtag Bring Back Bob campaign. And jokes aside, we are looking forward to having Bob back next week. But yeah, we have our guest host, Alfred Ngaro today, which is great because actually a lot of what we're going to be touching on, from the Green Party to Te Pati Maori, the polls and a few other things, a lot around political process actually. And so your insight, Alfred, will be incredibly welcome. To those who might be joining for the first time, this is, as I say, Family First's weekly show where we interrogate and play back, hence the rather, well, you can decide if it's clever or not, political playback title. We look at some of the elements of politics over the last week. And those who are joining, I can see some of you coming through the chat now, you'll be viewing this live across a variety of platforms. But if you want to comment live into the show, you can, and let Alfred and I know what you think or ask questions. But you need to be on the Family First Facebook page or the Family First YouTube channel for you to get your message in. And if the system works, which it does, you can actually have your messages here. So just really quickly, Alfred, I'm going to say hello to a few people because that's what I do. To Catherine, to Ray. I hope I may have said that wrong. Sadly, is looking to leave New Zealand forever, which is terrible. Obviously, their decision. To KW and lovely Gisborne. To Rosie. Lovely to have you on. Sue, lovely to have you here. We've got someone from the Kapiti Coast, Gardener Gone Wild. You can come and help on my property. And a shout out for both you and me, Alfred. So to everyone messaging, thank you so much. It's lovely to have you here on the show. Look, it's been a huge political week, Alfred. There is no shortage of controversial issues. But I think this is the top one that no one seems to be actually discussing, I think, sufficiently enough. Any quick takes on the demise of the cookie bear?
Yeah, well, that goes right to the heart of things, doesn't it? I mean, you and I grew up. I mean, I don't know if you're old enough to be 57, Simon. So,
you can stay. You can stay.
You're still a spring chicken. Bob, and on the other hand, he's a lot older, with his gold card. But no, Cookie Bear. I mean, it's an icon, right? 57 years, went from Hudson's to Griffin's. And I can remember as a kid, it was great. And my favorite, to be honest, was not so much the chocolate chippies, though they were great. Actually, it was the hundreds and thousands. And it just reminds me, I suppose we grew up in an age and a time when the whole thing around bears and animals, Cash and the Elephant. Do you remember that happened when ASB?
ASB, yes.
That's the piggy bank. And we thought Cashin was a like an Indian name or an African name. It wasn't. It was a play on cash in, and so that's what I found out. But, as kids, you had this little plastic piggy bank, you put some coins in there. And so animals represented a way, I suppose, for a generation that it reflected, our sense of being drawn towards whether it be a product or a service. So sad to see the bear go.
And so that wraps up Political Playback, guys. This really is the issue of the... Only kidding. No. It's a light aside, but I felt a bit sad as well, actually. But speaking of sad, and it's a terrible segue, I want to talk about the Greens. Obviously, they are in quite a mess at the moment, and primarily around this fellow, so Benjamin Doyle, one of their new MPs, around his social media. So we should talk around that. Alfred, we've obviously got the wider dynamics within the Greens, particularly of how they're trying to defend things. So as you can see, or viewers can see, despite what he's been alleged behaviours and decisions that he's made on social media, The media itself are running lines like the community is vulnerable after a political attack without actually explaining things. And then if I might, Alfred, I'm just going to play this short clip, and that's where we might enter into the conversation, is how Chloe Swarbuck in particular is attempting to defend the situation. So I'll just let this run.
So the posts in question are from prior to them being a member of Parliament, and again, the account was a private account.
So were the posts appropriate, regardless of whether they're actually doing it? Using that terminology, with an image of a child, is that appropriate?
You are, I think, trying to put this in quite an oversimplified frame. Again, the language that we're talking about, the posts of somebody from the rainbow community putting a picture out with their child on a private account, I think it is entirely appropriate that, again, what we're talking about here is a member of the queer community using language that is absurd and irreverent and oftentimes used within the queer community. Context is critical.
So let's dive in. I mean, some people might need a slight indicator, Alfred, of what they're talking about, but I'm really curious on your perspective on particularly the way that both media, mainstream media, and certainly the leader of the Greens is trying to defend what's happening.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's typical of the Greens, right? They're playing the victim card, and this is nothing new. Do you remember when Golriz Garaman, she, at first there was an allegation, then the evidence was clear, and then what did they say? They said, oh, she's a woman of colour, and because of that, she's under huge amounts of pressure. She's a woman in Parliament, and people don't realise the attack from the public. I mean, seriously. I mean, many men and women, members of Parliament like you and I, when we were there were all sorts of nasty things that we've said that have been on our answer phone messages. People have sent us emails, letters and so forth. Look, it's part and parcel of what we have to go through. But to excuse it as being something that is part of the rainbow community, who, by the way, you've seen and many else people have seen, this is not who we are. Because really what it is, it's to do with paedophilia, right? And if it's not, then let him defend it. And he's been asked, look, why is it that 52 of those photos have been taken down? And the defense of saying that, well, it happened in his past and went in his private life, well, that same thing happened to Sam Uffendale when he was a teenager. All of a sudden, the news came out because someone turned around and complained about how he was arrested. Fair enough, you have to deal with it. But here's the same situation here where, Benjamin Doyle did something in the past and she's trying to say, oh, it was before he became a parliamentarian. Well, you don't get to run away from that. But look, one point that really came as I sat with this, Simon, and just to our listeners and those who are watching in, we've just had, a 3 to 4 year Royal Commission on State Abuse in care, but also those who've been severely abused when they were children. And, it's had a horrific impact and effect on people's lives. So when did we start changing things to accommodate for other people's behaviour? Why is the media not turning around and saying, we've just had a Royal Commission, we've heard some horrific stories of trauma and tragedy in people's lives, and now we've got this, and look, people say, no, the evidence says to be shared. Fair enough, but come on, now's the time you need to front up. The language, the words, the images all portray a paedophilia type behaviour. And even people from the rainbow community are calling it out as well. This is not who we are. So I just think that this is incredibly serious. I hope that people will turn around and say that the bar is so low now, he doesn't deserve to be in Parliament. He doesn't deserve to be able to ride on, and piggyback on the taxpayers' funds to allow him to sit there and to do what? To do what he's doing. And, the worst thing of it all, Simon, is that he's the spokesperson for early childhood education. The guy's got to go.
Yeah, I'm not sure how it's sustainable, although, from my perspective, it remains all allegations. But, this is the thing about allegations is that when they're there, you front them. And I've been struck that he's run for the hills. And I think, again, I've deliberately made the decision not to show some of the wording and the images. But as Alfred's mentioned to people, you're talking multiple images involving, we understand, his son, but sexualized innuendo, the use of very inappropriate emojis and so forth. And you're quite right, you would think after all that we've learned over the decades and through that recent royal inquiry, we should be leaning in to prioritise the care of children. And that begins with asking questions. And that's one of the great disappointments for me at the moment, is that the mainstream media, by and large, are not. They're making a huge array of excuses. Just like, as I say, this is just, both you and I have been in politics. This is a classic deflection technique, trying to make out a victimhood it's gaslighting, isn't it, really?
Of course it is. Yeah, and then, as you know, many of the rainbow community have come out and say, this is not who we are. It's very convenient to turn around and throw them all under there. And then what it's meant to do, it's meant to be like this facade of protection to say, look, we can't say anything now. It's like when you talk about, Islamic things. Oh, you could be Islamophobic. And then all of a sudden they say, no, you're homophobic, right? They've created all these different phobias, as part of this critical theory of saying that we can't question, or challenge a point of view. Of course we can. It's part of democracy. And you're in the heart of democracy. You're in the heart of where laws are made. And so therefore you should be under the most amount of scrutiny for what you say and what you do. And look, like you said, Simon, it is an allegation, but I tell you what, it's pretty damning when you've got pictures, you've got words, other people are saying, we know what these words are used for. And fair enough, if he's going to come out and say, no, this is not what it is, then stand up, I would say be a man, but I don't know what to say here. Be whoever you choose to be, but have the courage of your conviction, right? And stand up and front up for you, your family, your party, and for the sake of what it means, the honour of being a member of Parliament.
Yeah, I see actually a comment I was putting on the screen from Nancy Margaret about the standards of Parliament. I mean, we're there to be accountable. You and I were accountable. If we said things that people didn't like, lots of emails, phone calls, texts. I was asked the other day about my pro-life comments, which had a huge media storm. So here's me being almost chased around because I have an opinion on life issues. And yet here we have some actually serious allegations which go right to the heart of character. And the media don't seem to be actually asking the questions. And again, all the deflections, I was really struck in Chloe's supposed defence. Again, it's private and was in the past. Well, as you mentioned, tell Sam Uffindell that, or a whole host of other MPs who have had their backgrounds critiqued. But then it was all about, as you again rightly talked, she basically smeared an entire community that they would all be happy with this. And as you say, there's a lot within the LGBTQI community who go, actually, no, we find this language wrong, don't suggest that this is normal. And the last point that really struck me is Chloe, and I'm seeing it in media too, Alfred, keep talking about, well, it's context. It's the context, and also it's like the vibe of the thing. And also saying, well, this is just part of a subset of the queer community. And you'd go, well, if you're a proper journalist, you'd go, what is the context? And what is this subset that you're referring to? But they're not. They're near silent. It's almost, and I'll take your take on this, bad English, they're almost accessories. If this turns out to be as bad as is suggested, we are seeing political leaders like Chloe Swarbuck and media personalities enabling this and deliberately turning a blind eye. I mean, I think that's quite serious beyond the man himself.
Well, she was asked the question, Chloe was, so you've defriended yourself from, and she said, yeah, that's right. So the question is, why? Because she knows. She knows, and look, they've got a whole history, right? They've just come through so many different issues, and I was saying the other day on Straight Talk that, they used to be the party about the environment. We knew what they were, Roger Donaldson, Jeanette Fitzsimons, and going trekking up in the Urawetas or wherever it was, and they're talking about the environment, the kiwi, the kōkako bird and all sorts of things. Now, all they want to talk about is themselves, about their feelings, their pronouns, but they things that actually really matter to certain people, to many people, you don't hear it. You're on mute.
I'm always on mute. I have this wonderful little kill switch on my desk. President Trump has it to get a Coke. Mine shuts me up, and I always forget to unmute. No, I was just saying we will be touching on other political parties that people are going, oh my God, they're piling in on the Greens. But I just think this is the political story at the moment. But it's not just Benjamin Doyle and his social media accounts. We've also got this Green MP making a whole series of suggestions. I wouldn't mind your take
That's not justice. That's unfair. It's cracking down on people who have got no other means to survive. The heavier visual presence of police does not make people feel safer. It makes people feel more on edge because there are more police around.
Yeah, so
I'm going to have to restart that because I tell you what, that's not the full one. Oh, unbelievable. Typical me. But, dear old Tamantha, I'm going to play that one again for you in a second. Oh, we're getting there. God, I mute myself. We do this, we do that. We're all over the place, Alfred. I tell you what, don't bring back Bob and replace me. Maybe that's the solution.
Prisons are overcrowded and there are too many people in there that are serving short sentences for very minor things. I spoke to a woman last week in one of the 3 prisons that I visited last week, and she was in there for shoplifting $12 worth of items. Now that's $151,000 worth of taxpayer money going into locking someone up who couldn't afford to feed themselves. That's not justice. That's unfair. It's cracking down on people who have got no other means to survive. The heavier visual presence of police does not make people feel safer. It makes people feel more on edge because there are more police around.
So got quite a few claims there. $12 crimes, don't like having police. What planet is this person on?
Yeah. So the thing is that it's a lie, right? You don't get locked up for $12, stealing $12. She's just made stuff up like that. And then she's quoted $156,000 to house a prisoner, right? So she's just trying to inflate things. And look, they're all trying to jump in, right? She's come out of Wellington City Council, by the way, Tamantha Paul. She was on the council there. God help us if Tory whānau comes out. Then that's going to be really crazy. But anyway, so Tamantha Paul, she's just trying to make a name for herself, right? Trying to turn around and say, I'm standing up for justice. And I saw this woman, $12. And you and I know that's not true.
No.
There would have been probably repeated recidivist, they call it recidivist offending. There would have been other issues that there would have been the reasons why she was incarcerated, put into prison and so forth. So that's not the issue there. But when she started to go on about the police, right, it's just, this is now a trade of anarchy, right? And isn't it crazy? The very thing that her own party leaders are doing are calling on the police to protect Benjamin Doyle, right? And so somehow there are things that they can do and they're allowed to do, right? But they can't be out on the beat protecting people, innocent people and so forth. I just want to say, people may not have seen, but she doubled down on this. Yeah. So she was down in Wellington on the weekend. She went to Cuba Duper, right? She was doing a DJ thing there. And all these anarchy songs that she was playing, and she was heard to be swearing and throwing the F-bomb and so forth. I mean, seriously, people, New Zealand, wake up. Why are we allowing ourselves to vote someone like this into Parliament, to be able to be here? And people want to say, oh, because we've got to have young people. Yep, well, let's have young people. But there are plenty of young people that are in their 20s and 30s that have far more common sense, intelligence, and the ability to make a valuable contribution than people like this, like Tamantha Paul. And again, another case of what I would say that she just needs. This is another one that just needs to go. I mean, I hope that, the voters, the traditional voters of the Greens will say, this is not the Green Party we once supported and were loyal to.
We'll actually get to some polling a bit later because again, look, Alfred, your and my political views and background are known. But the Green Party polling holds. The question is and there's the picture of her at DJ, and again, doubling down on her attacks on police. And I'm pleased you mentioned how ironic it is that, of course, the police and parliamentary security are called in a heartbeat and at the same time to protect Benjamin. But surely they must think this is working, that they feel that this is actually appealing to people, or are they just so self-focused that they do not realise the damage that they're doing to their own image?
Oh, look, I think there are those that's their base, right? And once you start getting into the whole, and I know in a moment you're going to get into polling, and when it comes to polling, right, there's this, it's what they call the salient, messaging, right? So in other words, that sort of messaging that when people think about certain political parties, it's that sort of subconscious messaging or belief system that we have about people and a party. And so when it comes to an environment, everyone always thinks the Green Party. When it comes to immigration, they think about New Zealand first. When it comes to the economy, it's about national. When it comes to health and education, it's about labour. So I think the thing is that subconsciously people still tick the box around the polling saying, yep, it's environment. But I hope that there's enough of this bad news, this exposure of just how bad things are, that again, traditional voters will say this is not the party we used to vote for. And I hope that come next year's election, they'll see the results that where people say this is not the sort of people or the party that we want to see inside Parliament.
Yeah, well, I'll read it because Sandy's comment actually is touched on a lot of what you've just said, and it's too big for the whole screen. But she said the decent thing for the Greens would be to let them fall on their swords and allow the party to rebuild more as the old Greens were. I mean, it's obviously up to them, not you and I, to decide that. But actually, they do need a refresh. I mean, this is 2 MPs on the back of a whole pile of others, just one problem after another. And I keep saying it myself. We were in Parliament when a number of colleagues on the national side weren't crowning themselves in glory, and we were going through more leaders than hot dinners. So, parties go through this, but it seems to be getting worse. And so that segues me poorly into the Maori Party, because, of course, well, not literally, you'll remember this because you and I were not there, but the haka during the vote on the Treaty Principles Bill. And so it's all being referred now to the Privileges Committee, and the Maori Party are refusing to turn up. But before I play a little clip of the Maori Party MPs saying why they don't want to attend the Privileges Committee, do you want to just let people in, Alfred, to a little bit of a sense of what is this powerful Privileges Committee that keeps being referred to?
Well, there's a phrase called parliamentary privilege, and what it means is that you can be free from free from defamation. In other words, there's certain things you can say that you wouldn't normally say. In fact, Simon, do you remember that you'd hear people say if they'd say something that sounded defamatory or they'd attack the person's name, character, family, whatever it may be, right? Here's what they'd say it on the tiles. Because when you went out of the parliamentary house, right, out of the chamber, and you went onto the tiles, that there's certain places in which parliamentary privilege does not hold. And if you said it on the tiles, you could be held to. In fact, many politicians, Winston, a lot of other people have been held to account. Why? Because they said it out on the tiles. Once you're out of there, you lose parliamentary privilege. So parliamentary privilege really allows for Parliament to have an independent process and a way of discussing, making laws and putting them together. And so you have this Privileges Committee that upholds the protocols. Because like any place, in Māoridom, they call it the tikanga. Other cultures have different ways that if you go into a church or people say when you go into certain places, like someone's home, you observe certain protocols of respect because it's what keeps order inside the house. So, you have standing orders that it's there. That's all part of the rules and regulations to ensure that we have robust conversation and debate and decision making, but at the same time too, there's still upheld a modicum of respect and dignity for the house. When you breach those, then the Privileges Committee is what upholds parliamentarians to account. It's not a court, but it is a committee that allows itself to regulate that. And so therefore you can often it's the Speaker that then will make the determination to send an MP, or in this case MPs, to the Privileges Committee to hear their side, to their explanation, but to allow them to say that there has been a breach of parliamentary standards. That's called the standing orders that are really important. And in this case, that's what's happened. And the Speaker of the House had there was nothing more that he could do but to submit them to the Privileges Committee to be held to account.
And Alfred's, dead right. And it's a privilege to be in Parliament. It's a privilege to be able to speak. We are, when you're MPs, you are very much protected. I don't mean the physical protection, but the ability to speak and say whatever you want. And the Parliament is what they call sovereign. It sits above the courts. It sits above everything. It's the MPs who make the laws. But you're dead right, Alfred. The place needs a modicum of respect and structure for it to operate. It needs its rules. And I'm pleased you mentioned marae as much as churches, mosques, wherever. Because, of course, in my view, the Māori Party makes a big thing of tikanga. We've got to respect tikanga. But what strikes me with those three MPs in particular, but their entire caucus, is they show no respect to anyone else's. You know, I think I wrote about it a while back, if I turned up to a marae and started throwing about white magnolias, screaming for women to be able to speak on the pai, yeah, I'm not sure I'd be referred to a privileges committee. I'm not sure how well it would go. But of course you wouldn't do that. It's about respect. And the thing for people, and I'll play the video of their response, haka has its place, but in Parliament you don't leave your seat and start moving towards other MPs. I mean, that's an ancient reason, just again to keep the space, because things get passionate there. It's why Julianne Genter got into trouble, wasn't it? Because what did she do? She went and shirt-fronted a minister. Was it, who was it?
Matt Ducey.
That's right. So, you know it yourself. I mean, it can get really intense in the debating chamber, can't it?
Oh, look, but what she did was, you know, she crossed the floor, went up to him in his face, right? And basically started yelling at him. I mean, seriously. She knew, she broke the rules, because, you know, that's threatening behaviour.
And it's the same as, in effect, it's a similar vein here, to leave your chair, to be moving towards another MP, in this case haka, and threatening. There were gun symbols, trigger symbols. We talk about the order of the House, and it's why, again, you don't leave your seat, because in the past, and you see it in other parliaments around the world, they leave, they punch ups, they throw in their shoes. It's the same reason why, you know, as MPs, remember, you're not allowed to call people hypocrites. There's a whole lot of banned words. Do you want to quickly explain to people why we ban certain words in the House to maintain order?
Well, that's right. I mean, you can't say the word liar, right? And that's why, because all MPs, well, the thing is that it's a currency, and it's a biblical thing, right? Because honor is the currency that upholds decorum and dignity and integrity. So you have to always think well of each other. So therefore, the Speaker would say that all members are honourable. And so when you start to use certain language and certain words that dishonours the integrity of a person, then you can be held to account.
Yeah. So they've been referred because of their behaviour. And again, just to really stress this to people, they chose to do the haka while the vote was being counted. And if, you know, we know anything about democracy, it relies on a vote. And actually people casting that vote. It's almost, I was going to say sacred, that's overcooking it, but it's a really important moment. And in the middle of that vote, the Māori Party MPs chose to do their haka. So they disrupted the vote. Not only did they get out of their seats, etc., etc. So they were pretty serious. And so off to the Privileges Committee. And this has been their response. And I'm just going to make sure that this one is starting in the right place.
Represented this kaupapa through. Committee refused to allow us to have a joint session. We got up and represented this kaupapa through haka collectively. The committee rejected our right to have a council present. Submissions were a really crucial part of this, particularly involving our tikanga, given that made up a critical part of the complaint. The committee refused to allow expert testimony from Te Temara on tikanga Māori, which denies our opportunity to provide context for our actions and context for their understanding.
I was struck, Alfred, that just like Chloe, they're talking about context. They all want to turn up together, and they want legal representation. I mean, what can you share with listeners around how the Privileges Committee does and doesn't work in those regards?
Well, again, the Privileges Committee, it's not a court of law, and though it has certain rules, what it does is that it tries to accommodate, obviously, for the members of Parliament to be able to justify their position. I just want to say, though, when you go back and you watch Penny Henare, so he came to the Privileges Committee because he too was one of those. Now, he wasn't the three that went onto the floor. He just stood where he was. And the first thing he did was this. He said, look, I've read McGee's. So he understands what parliamentary process and privileges are all about. And he said, and I realised that when I did stand at that time, I too was disrupting parliamentary process. And he said, for that, I apologise. I understand tikanga. So he understood full well about what was going on. And at the same time, too, he talked about what it meant to be Māori, about the haka and so forth. In this case with the Māori Party, this is not the first time that they have been challenging the whole process and the protocols of Parliament. But here's the thing that I would say. Your role of responsibility and what you've elected for is not just to challenge the process of Parliament, but it's also to ensure that you can be part of contributing to the peace, the welfare and prosperity of the people of New Zealand, Aotearoa. And in this case, as Māori MPs, and so I would say to them this, you've done a lot of work and being able to put your hands up, you've done haka, you've done protest, you've done all these things. How has it contributed to the welfare and the well-being? I mean, Simon, that's what that parliamentary prayer was all about. Putting all personal and private interests aside. That's what it talks about. We beseech thee, that old King James word of saying, we cry out to thee that you would give us divine guidance, that we would conduct the affairs of this house, right, to the peace, welfare and prosperity. So these things are really important. And so what's happening is that they've actually breached all of that, and even to the point where they want to redefine the rules of the Privileges Committee. Now, the other interview that came after that interview, right, was with Judith Collins. I don't want to jump in. I'm not sure if you're going to show that at all.
No, I don't have it. No, you're doing well, though. You keep going.
So Judith Collins turned around and said, look, we're giving them another opportunity. And she said, why is that? Because there's a real flexibility and consideration for members of Parliament, right? Like she said, it's not a court of law, but there are rules, and it is serious. And so as a privileged committee, she's giving them the opportunity, as the chairperson, to come again, present their case. But they're trying to redefine all the rules so that it benefits them, trying to claim that it's unfair, unjust. No. You were voted in on a system that has these set of rules. If you didn't like them, then why did you stand in the first place? And that's what I want to say, that, people can't have it both ways.
No. And the other thing I'd add too is their arguments might sound okay, but it's not how the system works. As an MP, you are accountable for your actions to your fellow MPs. So, actually, here's a question. Were you ever hauled in front of the Privileges Committee, or will you deny all knowledge?
No. And in fact, I don't think I was ever kicked out of the house, man. I was a goody two-shoes, eh? No, I wasn't. There was a couple of times I did sort of get a little bit rowdy and rattly, and the speaker would sort of tell us off at the back. And I think that was you and I making a lot of noise. But anyway, no, I was never kicked out of the house. So I was never taken to the Privileges Committee.
No, nor I. Although you and I caused trouble quietly down the back. The class of 2011 were a wonderful but mischievous, fun-loving bunch. Shall we say that?
No, we were great.
But just quickly, so the Māori Party, just so people understand, if you're an MP, you stand by yourself for the decision that you've made. I don't think it's, in my view, Alfred, it's not completely unrealistic that all three of them are heard together. But again, as an individual MP, you stand by what you've done. As you said at the start, it's not a court of law. So having a lawyer, Chris Finlayson in this case, come along, it's not for Chris Finlayson to be talking, it's for the MP to talk to their peers about why they, broke the tikanga or all the rules. And then trying to bring in expert witnesses around tikanga. Wouldn't matter what they're expert witnesses in about anything. This is, again, not a court of law. It's asking, one set of MPs are asking their peer, why did you act the way you did? We don't need context. We don't need excuses. We want you to explain why you thought, in this case, a Māori Party, you guys were far more important than the tradition of this Parliament.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And look, if there was an issue, and look, Parliament, has evolved over time, right? Simon, you and I know when there were treaty bills that were before the House, and, it was requested, it was asked of the House, would it consider to allow a waiata at the end, right? Or a haka. Why? Because it was a means of respect and honour for those that are passed and for what actually had been committed to in law in regards to post-treaty settlements and so forth. And so that was great. Why? Because there was a discussion, there was a way of doing things. If there was an issue, why have they not done that beforehand or gone to the Speaker and say, look, we'll go through this process, but can we have a longer conversation? Can there be other accommodations for things? You can do that.
Yeah.
And so Parliament is so, like you said, it's flexible. But it also has to have a set of rules that guide, the whole political process, and to be
Well, I'm
honourable.
pleased. Yeah, well, I'm pleased you mentioned that. When we started in Parliament, I don't recall there being waiata, particularly at the end of treaty bills, but it became quite normal. And again, most of us, I think, were quite happy. In fact, everyone was happy with it, again, because it was structured, it was known, it wasn't interfering. So it'll be interesting to see where this whole process goes, which is my terrible segue finally into polls. We're not going to spend too much on this because I'm not so much a numbers man, which probably made me a bad politician. But, despite what the Māori Party's been up to and the Green Party, their votes are still holding. So the Māori Party there, still close to 5%. New Zealand First will be happy. They're at about 7%. ACT and Greens are both on about 10%. And Labour and National neck and neck, and I think it's about 33, 34. So, starting with the minor parties, I'm sure Winston's chuffed, but are we just really seeing with the likes of Greens and Te Pati Maori that this is just their core voters? It wouldn't matter what happens, that's just not going to change.
Yeah, look, that's exactly right. This is what you would call your base. And so they're always going to have a core base that's there. And then you have what they call swing voters, right? They're those that say, actually, I quite like this issue. Actually, I stand with, the treaty principles, well, if that's the case, people saying that. And so they may shift across if they think that's the right thing to do. That's important. I think the thing that's really interesting about polls, look, there are those who are the pollsters and those who are strategists, and you know that, Simon. And strategists don't always, they look at the polls, but can I encourage you that, if you're a little bit of a political fanatic or, you're sort of into it, there's a thing called the Ipsos Issues Monitor, right? Every quarter it gets, and it's a deeper dive. And what they do is that they actually create surveys, they do groups, sessions where they're actually getting into the real issues that are there. So if you look at the polls and then if you look at the issues, the current Issues Monitor of February for this quarter that's come out has shown that, for the first time since 2018, it's what you call support for the coalition government has dropped down to 4.2%. And this is a rating out of 10. So, it's a significant drop that says that while they're still governing under a coalition, and yes, the polls are showing they're just ahead of Labour. It does show that the fact is that trust and confidence is starting to wane, and they need to be conscious and careful. So it's not just looking at the polls in sense of, because as you know, they're almost like closed-end questions, wrong direction, right direction, and you don't get an open conversation. So you need to have both the polls and the Ipsos survey monitor, issues monitor, that gives you a sense of what's really important. Why do we say that? Because as I said before, in the end, if the economy is the biggest issue, the votes and the people will start swing towards National, ACT, and obviously New Zealand First, right? If it's to do with health, education, social services, and housing, if that becomes the key issue, then what happens? People start to drift towards potentially, and this is the swing voters, move away from your base, right? But then you got swing voters that will move towards that, right? And at the moment, inflation is still the biggest issue.
Yeah.
55% of people that are surveyed, number one. Healthcare and hospitals, 41%. Now, that's a big thing. The economy, 28%. So you can see that's why Labour snuck in there, right? And it's got a little bit of, edging towards people saying, people are hurting because they're not getting appointments. I can tell you this now. It took me nearly 4 or 5 weeks to get an appointment for my father, at 84 years old, just to get an appointment with his own doctor, who he's been there for years, right? That's how tough it is at the front line. So now when it becomes an issue and it begins to hurt for voters, then they start to say, who could best serve us in addressing this issue? So you got to get your poll, you got to get your Ipsos Issues Monitor. That gives you a bit of a broader picture about actually what's currently happening at the moment in the country.
Yeah. And I think, just putting this one up to, this is leadership, obviously, Labour, National or Hipkins, Luxon. And you just mentioned a bit earlier where the polls in general are going, and obviously you've got to tie it up against Ipsos. Someone's asking, Maya's asking Ipsos, it's Ipsos, IPSOS, if I've got that right, just so Maya knows. But this trust of the political parties, this trust of leadership, this graph regardless if it's Luxon or Hipkins, it's going down for both of them. I think, in my view, for what it's worth, we're just seeing a lack of confidence in the country. Things aren't great. And people can be told they are. People can be distracted by all sorts of scandals like we were talking earlier. But, when the price of cheese remains what it was, filling up the car is expensive. As you mentioned, weeks to get an appointment for your 84-year-old father to see a doctor. That's what really impacts for people. I'm just going to put this up here because it's very clear that Bella believes that only Alfred stands for moral principles. Sorry, I'm being very facetious, Bella. That's a very kind comment, and he certainly does. Hey, a few other quick matters. Again, I think having you here, Alfred, alongside my good self, is to just sort of delve into some of the other processes of things which are happening. And by saying process, I hope that doesn't put people off. But there's been reports this week that around the Treaty Principles Bill that many of the submissions that the public have put in are not actually going to be included. And so there's a bit of a debate whether that's good or not. Do you mind just sort of talking people through, not so much about the Treaty Principles Bill, I think it was like 300,000 or something submissions, but do you want to talk through what normally happened in Select Committee and maybe what's happening here from your perspective? Then I'll add a few thoughts too.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to get down to some of the detail. I mean, because Simon, is that once you've submitted into the parliamentary process, and now it's all digital now, right? In most cases, though you can still, I think, mail them in. Once your submission has been in and it's been recorded and then noted back to you that it's been received, then that submission then goes through a process. However, if it is, and then you'll know this, that if they see that the submission has been one in which it's been a cut and paste, where someone has turned around, I think like a group like Action Station is a classic group, well, they'll turn around and they'll just say, just all you need to do is put your submission, put your name at the top and say that's you, and just sign it at the bottom and just acknowledge it, and that's it. Now, what happens is that actually doesn't, and if they see there's a number of these, then I've just forgotten the word that we use for that. It's not rote. What are they?
Form submissions.
Form submission. It becomes a form submission, and that means it gets bundled into almost one. And hence the reasons why that people have been encouraged and say, you've got to make sure, you can get some tips on how to put together your submission, but you've got to show that it's not a formed submission. And so it could be the case that we've got a number of what they call form submissions, cut and paste, and people just put them in, and they won't be included in the sense of their detail because they'll just have one of them, and it could be like 1,000 of them. And that'll be what they call formed submissions, and that'll be the one there. Otherwise, every other submission should be acknowledged, and if it's not, then you can actually then write into parliamentary to the clerk and actually ask for the reasons why it's not being recorded.
I think that's where some of the controversies start, as I understand it, insofar as you're dead right. If they're form submissions, if they're just repeating what other groups and individuals have said, they'll lump it together as one. I think the accusation here is actually going wider as well, which is there's just a whole pile they just have not got to. And I mean, you and I will know that the clerks do a great job. These are the officials, if you will, who process things. They've been almost overwhelmed. So I sort of have myself two takes on it, because at one level I can completely understand at one level why this is happening, because, select committees, and again, this is more for the viewers, select committees in effect don't have to accept every little bit of evidence. They don't have to accept every submission, because actually the point of a select committee is for the MPs to gain the knowledge they need to make a decision. And so there's not an automatic right, if you will, to have to accept all and everything. So at one level, with 300,000 plus submissions, I can sort of understand a little bit, Alfred, why they might push it away. But there's two little caveats coming in for me. One is, particularly around this particular bill, is they are, rumour is, because they're reading the papers before coming online, they're about to report the bill, this piece of law, back a month early. In other words, they've got more time where they could have actually respected the process. But it's probably the wider concern for me is this going to set a precedent where select committees rightly say, look, we don't need to engage all in every submission to make a decision. But are we creating a situation here in the future where governments go, no, thanks everyone for submitting on this cultural issue or this life issue, but we don't want to hear from you. I think it could potentially start a dangerous idea moving forward, precedent.
Yeah, look, I agree. And Simon, you and I know that on the inside, right, often it can be MPs on certain committees, and in this case, on this committee, who can sort of try to determine, dissuade, or trying to sort of distract that. Let's talk about the abortion law reforms that were put through. And you and I went through that, and we know that there were people, because remember, it's right across the board. You've got people who turn around and said, oh, no, we don't need to hear all those submissions. And so they actually, during the select committee process, and it's a closed process, but they actually get to decide how many they'll hear, where they'll hear them, what time frames that they'll be allowed, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 1 minute, 2 minutes, doesn't matter, it just depends. But you'll always have those in a particular who have maybe a particular bias towards a certain way who will turn around and say, no, we don't need to hear that many. No, we'll shut it off at this date and we don't have to acknowledge them. And really, this goes against the whole democratic process that allows for the public. This is an opportunity that allows for the public to contribute, right? Submissions are called for. That's what the whole parliamentary process is meant to be, both transparent. It's also meant to be engaging and an open opportunity for people to be able to do that. And many times we've had to debate euthanasia bill is another classic one, right? Because it becomes one of these contentious, conscious issues that people turn around and say, no, we don't want to hear too much of that. And in this case, the Treaty Principles Bill, it's creating a lot of harm, right, for the coalition. So they want it in, out, gone, so that they've got this magical runway, which is what they call it, their campaign runway, where there's just smooth sailing, building up your momentum, where people sort of gain this trust and confidence in you. And so I do have a concern, and I think people need, rightly so, can be asking questions.
Yeah, and my sort of final comment on it is I saw a worrying trend during my time in Parliament, chairing multiple committees, where the attempt in the later years of MPs to try and shut down the discussions, trying to find more and more creative ways to stop submissions, be it the form submissions or actually we just find the language offensive. Oh, it's upsetting that someone might express a pro-life view. It's like, well, it doesn't matter. They're allowed to have their say. So speaking of having their say, and we'll begin to wrap up, the New Zealand First Party, I think it's Jamie Arbuckle, has put this members' bill into the biscuit tin. And in effect, Alfred, and I've only skimmed it, but it basically says whenever there's a conscience vote, it has to go to a referendum. So, do you want to talk people through effectively what he's proposing and what the system looks like at the moment?
So first of all, the thing to remember to people is that, and Simon and I were obviously part of the National Party, any conscience bills have to go through a scrutiny, has to go through a process with your own caucus. You have to stand up, you have to submit it, you have to tell them what it is. Because if it goes against party policy, if it goes against party values, then it can't be seen that some rogue MP and member of your caucus has gone out and turned around and said, no, we're going to bring back the cookie bear back again. We're going to care that Griffiths have done that, right? And so you've got to make sure. So first of all, when a party has an MP turning around and put a conscience vote, always know that it has had to go through a process so that it does reflect that party. So this bill will be endorsed by New Zealand First. The second thing is that, to then turn around and say it is, and this is typical of New Zealand First, right? Because part of its constitution and its process has always been that any conscience vote should be submitted to referenda. But it's similar to what, Paul Goldsmith, our friend Goldie, has said about the Treaty Principles Bill.
He's probably watching right now secretly from his office. Hi, Goldie.
It's too complex an issue, right? Yeah, a bit of shout out for Goldie. That'll up his ratings because, his social media needs to go up a little bit. So you and I have just...
We'll help him out.
Yeah, like Bob, he'll get one extra person liking his Facebook. No. So I'm a bit lost in translation now. But what I was going to say to you that that's right. New Zealand First has always had this policy of being able to say that all conscience votes should go to a referenda, but it's not as simple as that. And it's like what the treaty principle is trying. It's trying to simplify a process that's quite complex. Why is that? Because not everything should be through a referenda. Sometimes it has to go, conscience votes, and that means a majority of these votes that are conscience votes are votes that often are a social issue, and they're issues that are things like, for instance, euthanasia, and often they're deemed to be sort of controversial, right? Euthanasia, abortion law reforms. It's quite interesting, though, because, when you think about the non-binary gender identity, they went through the passports and that went through internal affairs. That was Tracy Martin who put that through. But there were different elements in which they had to. So I just think that, in regards to this bill, I think it's oversimplifying it to say that all conscience bills need to go through a referenda. And one of the things that I was quite strong on with the euthanasia bill, it was 24 months to go through a whole process of select committee, to go into oral submissions, traveling up and down the country, and then to put a very simple referenda question before the public, in which even parliamentarians over nearly 30 months struggled to come to a true consensus or understanding on a very complex issue. That's why I say you can't just say, let's just let the public decide. It's too much simplifying, which I think that there'll be variables.
Look, I'm with you. Look, I think this is classic New Zealand First. And to be fair on them, it's very consistent. Winston and the team have always been referenda. But you know what? Conscience votes are in some ways what you vote, particularly your MPs in for, is to have an Alfred, a Simon, a Chloe, a Chris Hipkins, it doesn't matter who, to exercise their conscience. That's why we're there, and to take the time to ponder the issues as deeply as we can, because I've said many a time, and I've debated often with Bob on this too, referendum often takes a very complex issue into a very simplified statement or question with a very binary yes or no answer. And it doesn't matter if it's abortion, euthanasia, cannabis, prostitution, marriage, there's a lot of nuance. And in many ways, that's what we're paid to do. So I can see what New Zealand First is trying to do. I sort of understand it. But at the same time, as you've been rightly articulating, I think it oversimplifies things. I'm going to give you a little bit of a break, Alfred, and people are going to wrap up. I'm just going to give you guys a quick, because we're wrapping up now. It's almost 6 o'clock. None of you are going to be watching TV 1 or 3 News, but you'll still want to head away at 6. But just a little bit of a new preview of some of the stuff happening here at Family First.
If you're looking for news that you can trust, commentary on key family and social issues, and conservative conversations, go no further. Family First has them all. Start each weekday informed. 7:30 a.m. live, Monday, Wednesday and Friday, Daybreak with Bob McCoskrie, as he gives an overview of key stories that you need to be aware of. 7:30 a.m. live Tuesday and Thursday, a more in-depth discussion, Solid Ground with Simon O'Connor. On Monday nights, live at 8 p.m, watch Straight Talk with our panel. Thursdays, live at 5 p.m, Political Playback, as we discuss the week in Parliament and New Zealand politics in general from a conservative viewpoint. You can watch all of these features live and also on demand on our website, Facebook, X, Instagram, LinkedIn and on our YouTube channel. Plus, there's regular episodes of social commentary with Mick Blog and weekly interviews in family matters. There's also additional commentary on our website, and both Simon and Bob are writing on Substack. Finally, something worth watching that you can trust. Go to familyfirst.nz for more details.
Do we sleep? The answer is no. Between all the shows and writing, we do not sleep. Only kidding. Alfred, you have been an absolute champion coming on board. I hope we actually have you again. Thank you for your thoughts and insights and being part of the show today. A shout out to Bob. Get well. Little good to have him back on the show. We'll continue this Bring Back Bob campaign. But again, Alfred, thanks so much to you. I don't know, any final message for our listeners before I wrap things up?
No, it's great. And I just want to say thank you to Family First and to Bob and Simon and the rest of the team. I think that I speak on behalf of a number of Kiwis and New Zealanders to say that we thank you for what you do to raise the issues, the concerns, but also to opportunities about what we can do to not only be able to advocate into Parliament, but even having those conversations in our communities, across a dining room table, wherever it may be, on a barbecue. Well, having a barbecue, not on the
I was
barbecue.
going to say, what's happening in your house?
That's what happens when you come on the show. You feel like you're on the barbecue, the heat is on. But I just want to say thank you and just acknowledge all the hard work that you do as well. So it's very, very much respected and appreciated.
Well, again, Alfred, it's marvellous having you on here. To everyone viewing and listening, we'll have Alfred back on Political Playback. He's often on our Straight Talk show live on a Monday night. And to all of you commenting, and Alfred, go and check out the comments. There's a lot of love for you there. But to all of you who have tuned in across all these platforms, thanks so much. Have a wonderful night. And we may see some of you live tomorrow morning at 7:30 a.m. Have a great night, everyone.